The elevator doors slid shut with a soft mechanical whisper, trapping Mia Ramirez in a suffocating silence that seemed to echo her deepest fears. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel, showing a woman whose tired eyes betrayed the weight of carrying an entire world on her shoulders. Have you ever felt that crushing moment when you realized the people you trusted were plotting against you? Welcome back. Tell me from which city you are watching me and what time it is there. Now listen to this story. Mia pressed the button for the 14th floor, her finger trembling slightly as she prepared to face another day at Prestige Luxury Holdings, unaware that this morning would mark the beginning of a 9-month journey that would shatter everything she thought she knew about loyalty, justice, and her own worth. The company occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, its marble lobby adorned with awards and photographs celebrating decades of success in the luxury goods industry. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany furniture, while the subtle scent of expensive leather and polished wood filled the air. For 2 years, Mia had walked these halls as an operations coordinator, managing inventory systems and client relations with quiet efficiency. She arrived early, stayed late, and never complained about the extra responsibilities that seemed to multiply with each passing month. But today felt different. The whispers had started 3 weeks ago, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. Colleagues who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact, their smiles forced and uncomfortable. David Collins stood waiting when the elevator doors opened, his perfectly tailored suit and practiced smile masking the calculation behind his steel-gray eyes. At 42, he had climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless precision, stepping over anyone who dared to question his methods. "Mia, perfect timing," he said, his voice carrying that false warmth that made her skin crawl. "Sophia and I need to see you in Conference Room B. Quarterly review." Sophia Collins emerged from behind her husband like a designer-clad shadow, her platinum blonde hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her Cartier watch catching the fluorescent lights. She had married into the Collins name but wielded it like a weapon, using her connections to the board of directors to influence decisions far beyond her official role as corporate communications manager. "We have some concerns to discuss," Sophia added, her smile sharp as broken glass. The conference room felt like a trap, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below, while providing no escape from the tension that crackled between the 3 occupants. Mia sat across from the couple, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. David opened a manila folder with theatrical precision, his movements deliberate and intimidating. The documents inside contained her performance reviews, client feedback forms, and attendance records, each page marked with yellow highlighter and red ink annotations. "Your numbers from last quarter," he began, his finger tracing across a spreadsheet. "Concerning trends, wouldn't you say?" Mia leaned forward, studying the data that she knew by heart. Her client satisfaction scores were consistently above 90%. Her project completion rate flawless. Her attendance record marred only by a single half-day absence when her 7-year-old daughter Emma had been hospitalized with pneumonia. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "These numbers show consistent performance." Sophia's laugh was like ice-breaking. "Numbers don't tell the whole story, do they? There's the matter of reliability." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Mia felt her throat tighten, knowing exactly what Sophia meant, but refusing to give her the satisfaction of acknowledging the subtext. "Last month, you left early on Tuesday," David continued. "Something about childcare. My daughter's school called. She was sick. And 3 weeks ago, you were 10 minutes late. The bus broke down." "The point is," Sophia interjected, her voice growing sharper, "single mothers face inherent challenges that affect their professional commitments. It's not personal, Mia. It's just reality." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. Mia stared at the 2 people who held her future in their hands, recognizing the trap they had carefully constructed around her. How many times have you sat in a room where your worth as a human being was reduced to nothing more than your circumstances? She thought about Emma waiting at after-school care, trusting that mommy would pick her up on time, never knowing how precarious their entire life had become. The apartment rent due in 2 weeks, the grocery money carefully rationed to last until the next paycheck, the stack of medical bills on her kitchen counter that grew taller each month. "I need this job," she whispered, hating herself for the desperation in her voice. David closed the folder with a soft thud. "We understand. That's why we want to work with you. But changes need to be made." "What kind of changes?" Sophia leaned back in her leather chair, her expression almost bored. "We're restructuring your position, reducing responsibilities, adjusting compensation accordingly. It's either that or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. 20 floors below, Daniel King sat in his modest Honda Civic, reading emails on his phone while waiting for a parking meter to expire. At 38, he could afford a fleet of luxury vehicles, a penthouse apartment, and a staff of assistants to handle his daily needs. Instead, he chose anonymity, preferring to observe his companies from the shadows rather than from the gilded towers of executive leadership. 3 months ago, he had quietly purchased 65% of Prestige Luxury Holdings through a network of shell companies and investment firms. The board of directors knew him only as a new investor, a silent partner who rarely attended meetings and never interfered with day-to-day operations. But Daniel King had built his fortune by paying attention to the details that others ignored. And lately, those details had been painting a disturbing picture of the company's internal culture. His phone buzzed with a misdirected email, a message intended for HR but accidentally copied to his address. The subject line read, "Ramirez performance issues. Expedite processing." Daniel frowned, opening the attachment that contained Mia's personnel file. Her photograph showed a woman with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile, her credentials impressive despite her lack of advanced degrees. 2 years of exemplary service, glowing client testimonials, and only one black mark on her record, the day she had rushed to the hospital when her daughter nearly died from pneumonia. The email chain below painted a different story, revealing a coordinated effort between David and Sophia Collins to document performance issues that seemed manufactured out of thin air. Late arrivals that corresponded to public transportation delays, early departures that coincided with medical emergencies, and a pattern of criticism that began exactly 6 weeks after Mia had voiced concerns about discriminatory hiring practices during a staff meeting. Daniel closed his phone and stared up at the building where his employees were unknowingly playing out a drama that would determine not just one woman's fate, but the future of the entire company. Back in conference room B, Mia gathered the scattered pieces of her dignity and stood up slowly. The performance review had lasted 43 minutes, each moment designed to chip away at her self-worth and professional confidence. "I need time to think," she said. David's smile never wavered. "Of course. Take the weekend. We'll need your decision by Monday." As she walked toward the door, Sophia's voice followed her like poison in the air. "It's nothing personal, Mia. Some people are just better suited for different environments." The elevator ride down felt like falling through empty space, each floor marking another layer of humiliation and defeat. Mia pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over and ruin what little mascara she could afford to replace. The lobby bustled with afternoon activity, executives in expensive suits discussing million-dollar deals while maintenance workers in uniform pushed carts loaded with cleaning supplies. 2 worlds existing in the same space, separated by invisible barriers that determined who mattered and who remained unseen. Clara Martinez stood near the reception desk, pretending to review shipping documents while actually watching Mia's desperate exit. At 51, Clara had worked her way up from the mailroom to become David Collins's administrative assistant, a position that required her to balance loyalty to her boss with her own sense of right and wrong. For months, she had watched David and Sophia systematically undermine employees who didn't fit their vision of corporate perfection. Older workers suddenly found themselves relegated to lesser positions, pregnant women faced unexpected performance reviews, and anyone who questioned company policies discovered that their job security had mysteriously evaporated. But Mia's situation felt different, more calculated and cruel than the others. Clara had seen the real performance metrics, the ones that David carefully edited before presenting them to HR. She knew about the client who had specifically requested to work with Mia again, praising her professionalism and attention to detail. She had witnessed Sophia's campaign of whispered innuendos and social manipulation designed to isolate Mia from potential allies. As Mia disappeared through the revolving doors, Clara made a decision that would cost her everything she had built over 2 decades of careful corporate navigation. That evening, Mia sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and employment applications she had printed at the public library. Emma worked on her homework nearby, occasionally asking for help with math problems that seemed impossibly complex, given the chaos swirling through her mother's mind. "Mommy, are you okay?" Emma asked, looking up from her worksheet with the piercing intuition that children possess. "Just tired, sweetheart." Mrs. Rodriguez at school said her mommy lost her job but found a better one. "Maybe that will happen to you, too." Mia smiled despite the knot in her stomach. Maybe it will. But as she stared at the rejection letters already accumulating in her email inbox, hope felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The job market was brutal for single mothers without extensive education or professional networks, and her 2-year gap in employment before joining Prestige had left permanent scars on her resume. She calculated the numbers again, comparing her rapidly dwindling savings against their monthly expenses. 3 months, maybe 4 if she cut everything down to bare necessities. After that, the choices became impossible. Food or rent, utilities or medical insurance, stability or homelessness. Do you know what it feels like to count every dollar while watching your child sleep, wondering if you'll be able to protect them from the storm that's coming? Her phone buzzed with a text message from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, offering to watch Emma tomorrow morning for a job interview she hadn't scheduled and couldn't afford to take. The kindness of near strangers felt both heartwarming and humiliating, a reminder of how far she had fallen from the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. Meanwhile, Sophia Collins reclined in her marble bathroom, soaking in a tub that cost more than Mia's yearly rent while planning her next social gathering. The removal of one troublesome employee was just the first step in her broader strategy to elevate David's position within the company hierarchy. She had already identified 3 other potential targets: employees whose backgrounds or personal circumstances made them vulnerable to manufactured performance issues. The key was maintaining plausible deniability while systematically removing anyone who might threaten their ascent to executive leadership. Her phone rang, displaying David's number. "How did it go?" she asked. "Like taking candy from a baby. She'll take the demotion rather than risk unemployment." "And if she doesn't? Then we have documentation showing a pattern of unreliability and poor performance. HR will have no choice but to support termination." Sophia smiled, admiring her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Perfect. What about the others?" "Patterson in accounting is next. His age makes him an easy target, and Johnson in marketing has that speech impediment that affects client presentations." They spoke for 20 more minutes, refining their strategy with the cold precision of military planners preparing for battle. Neither considered the human cost of their schemes, the families that would be destroyed, or the lives that would be forever altered by their ambition. Daniel King sat in his downtown apartment, reading financial reports by lamplight while classical music played softly in the background. The space was comfortable but modest, decorated with books and artwork rather than the status symbols that typically adorned executive residences. His laptop screen displayed Mia Ramirez's employment file alongside dozens of other personnel records, painting a picture of systematic discrimination that had been hidden behind layers of corporate bureaucracy. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look. Employees who didn't fit the Collins vision of corporate image were being systematically eliminated through manufactured performance issues and strategic restructuring. He opened a secure messaging application and began typing a message to his head of security, requesting a comprehensive audit of all personnel actions taken in the past year. If his suspicions were correct, Prestige Luxury Holdings was facing potential legal liability that could destroy the company's reputation and financial stability. But more than that, Daniel found himself genuinely bothered by the human suffering he was discovering. He had built his wealth through ethical business practices and fair treatment of employees, believing that success built on the backs of the vulnerable was ultimately hollow and unsustainable. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. King, this is Clara Martinez from Prestige Luxury Holdings. I know this is unusual, but I have information you need to hear." Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable rain that turned the city streets into rivers of gray uncertainty. Mia walked Emma to her friend's house for a sleepover playdate, using the time alone to think through options that all seemed to lead toward the same inevitable conclusion. She could accept the demotion, take the pay cut, and hope to survive on reduced income while searching for other opportunities. She could refuse and face almost certain termination, gambling everything on finding new employment before their savings ran out. Or she could fight back, challenging the performance review through official channels and risking retaliation that could destroy any chance of future employment. The coffee shop on 5th Street was nearly empty, its windows fogged with condensation while rain drummed against the glass. Mia ordered the cheapest item on the menu and found a corner table where she could review her options without being overheard. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Is this Mia Ramirez?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Clara Martinez. I work at Prestige. We need to talk." An hour later, Clara sat across from Mia in the same corner booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since grown cold. For 30 minutes, she had detailed everything she knew about David and Sophia's campaign against targeted employees, providing names, dates, and documented evidence of systematic discrimination. "Why are you telling me this?" Mia asked. Clara stared out the window at the rain. "Because I have a daughter too. She's 26 now, but I remember what it felt like to be a single mother, wondering if I could provide for her tomorrow. This could cost you your job. Probably will, but some things matter more than job security." She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, Mia found copies of her real performance metrics, client testimonials that had never made it into her official file, and email exchanges between David and Sophia discussing their strategy for her removal. "There's more," Clara continued. "They're planning to target other employees next. Patterson in accounting, Johnson in marketing, probably Maria from customer service after that." Mia felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. The systematic nature of their scheme revealed a level of calculated cruelty that went beyond simple workplace politics. "What can we do?" "I've already reached out to someone on the board of directors. Can't say more than that right now, but there might be help coming from an unexpected direction." As they parted ways in the rain-soaked parking lot, neither woman realized that their conversation had been the catalyst for changes that would reshape the entire company. Monday morning arrived with deceptive sunshine, as if the weekend storms had washed the city clean for a fresh start. Mia chose her outfit carefully, professional but not submissive, confident but not confrontational. She had spent hours over the weekend rehearsing what she would say to David and Sophia, preparing for a conversation that could determine the trajectory of her entire future. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt different this time, charged with nervous energy and quiet determination. She had documented everything, organized her evidence, and prepared herself for whatever consequences might follow. David Collins stood waiting by her cubicle, his expression unreadable but somehow more tense than usual. "Conference room B," he said without preamble. "Sophia's waiting." But when Mia entered the room, she found 3 people instead of 2. Sophia sat at her usual position across from the door, her smile as sharp as ever. David took his place beside his wife, his confidence intact, but somehow less solid than before. The third person was a stranger, a man in his late 30s wearing a simple navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, his presence somehow commanding despite his unremarkable appearance. "Mia, this is Daniel King," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "He's with the investment group that recently acquired a stake in the company." Daniel stood and extended his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Ms. Ramirez, I've been reviewing your file. Impressive work." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. "We were just about to discuss Mia's revised position within the company." "Actually," Daniel said, settling back into his chair, "I'd like to hear Mia's perspective on her performance first. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story." For the next hour, the dynamics in Conference Room B shifted like tectonic plates beneath the surface of corporate politeness. Daniel asked pointed questions about specific projects Mia had managed, client relationships she had developed, and challenges she had overcome. With each response, it became clearer that the performance issues documented in her file bore little resemblance to her actual contributions. David interrupted frequently, attempting to redirect the conversation toward absenteeism and reliability concerns. But Daniel had done his homework, cross-referencing absence dates with external factors and finding reasonable explanations for every instance. The hospital records show your daughter was admitted with pneumonia on October 15th, he said, consulting his notes. That's the day marked as an unexcused early departure. Mia nodded, feeling tears threaten at the memory of Emma's pale face in the emergency room. She couldn't breathe. The doctor said if I had waited another hour. Of course you left work, Daniel said simply. Any parent would have done the same thing. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. That's exactly the point. Single mothers face divided loyalties that affect their professional reliability. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel turned his attention to Sophia with the focused intensity of a predator who had just spotted prey. Are you suggesting that employees with children are inherently less valuable to this company? I'm saying that some personal circumstances create professional challenges. And those challenges justify discriminatory treatment? David jumped in, recognizing the dangerous territory his wife was approaching. No one's talking about discrimination. We're simply addressing performance concerns through normal HR processes. Daniel opened his laptop and turned the screen toward the couple. The displayed spreadsheet showed Mia's actual performance metrics alongside those of her colleagues, revealing numbers that painted a very different picture than the one presented in her official review. Can you explain the discrepancy between these figures and the ones in Ms. Ramirez's personnel file? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Sophia attempted damage control. There must be some error in the data compilation. Multiple errors, consistently favoring certain employees while penalizing others, and all coincidentally targeting workers with specific demographic characteristics? Have you ever watched someone's carefully constructed lies crumble in real time? David's jaw tightened, his calculated composure beginning to crack under pressure. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the scope of this meeting. The scope, Daniel said calmly, is determining whether this company is engaging in systematic discrimination against employees based on their personal circumstances. And if so, what corrective measures are necessary. Mia sat frozen throughout the exchange, watching her persecutors face challenges they had never anticipated. The power dynamic that had seemed so absolute just days before was shifting with every question Daniel asked. Ms. Ramirez, he said, turning to her with genuine warmth, would you be interested in discussing a different kind of position change? Something that would allow you to use your skills more effectively while addressing the cultural issues we've identified? She looked across the table at David and Sophia, both now pale and uncertain. What kind of position? Director of Employee Relations. You would report directly to the board and have authority to investigate workplace concerns, implement policy changes, and ensure that all employees are treated fairly regardless of their personal circumstances. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in deep water. Mia felt her heart racing as she processed the implications. Not just employment security, but the power to protect others from the systematic persecution she had endured. I would need to maintain my current salary level, she said carefully. The position pays 40% above your current compensation, with full benefits and flexible scheduling to accommodate family responsibilities. David found his voice. This is highly irregular. Personnel decisions should go through proper channels. Daniel's smile was polite but cold. As the majority shareholder, I believe I have the authority to make staffing decisions that serve the company's best interests. The words hit David and Sophia like a physical blow. Majority shareholder. The quiet investor they had dismissed as insignificant was actually the person who controlled their professional destinies. I'll need some time to consider the offer, Mia said, though her heart was already singing with possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. Of course. Take the rest of the week. In the meantime, I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel actions taken in the past year. After dismissing David and Sophia with barely concealed contempt, Daniel remained in the conference room with Mia. The atmosphere lightened considerably once the couple departed, their toxic presence replaced by something that felt almost like hope. Why are you doing this? She asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city skyline beyond the windows. 3 years ago, my mother was fired from her job for taking care of my dying father. She had worked for the same company for 15 years, but when Dad got sick, her priorities shifted. Her boss called it performance issues. I called it humanity. I'm sorry. She died 2 months after Dad passed, still believing that she had somehow failed as an employee. I swore that day that I would never let anyone else feel that kind of shame for choosing family over corporate profits. Mia felt tears sliding down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune and the kindness of this stranger who had appeared like a guardian angel in her darkest hour. What happens to David and Sophia now? Daniel's expression hardened slightly. That depends on what our investigation uncovers, but I suspect their careers at this company are effectively over. Outside the conference room, word of the morning's drama spread through the office like wildfire. Clara Martinez found herself surrounded by curious colleagues demanding details she couldn't provide, while David and Sophia retreated to David's office for an urgent strategy session. "How much does he know?" Sophia demanded, her usual composure shattered. David paced behind his desk, loosening his tie as sweat beaded on his forehead. "Everything, apparently. Someone's been feeding him information." "Clara?" "Has to be. She's had access to all the personnel files." Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts with desperate efficiency. "I'm calling Richard Harrison on the board. He owes me a favor from the charity auction last year. It won't matter if King owns controlling interest. We don't know that for certain. He could be bluffing." But even as she said it, Sophia knew the truth. The quiet confidence in Daniel's voice, the detailed knowledge of company operations, the casual authority with which he had dismissed their carefully constructed performance review, everything pointed to someone with real power, not manufactured influence. David slumped into his chair, staring at the wall of commendations and achievement awards that had defined his professional identity. 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder, and it could all disappear because of one inconvenient employee and her inconvenient circumstances. "What if we cooperate?" he suggested. "Acknowledge some mistakes, agree to policy changes, maybe keep our positions with reduced responsibilities." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "You heard him. We're done. The only question is whether we leave quietly or get dragged through a public investigation." Tuesday morning brought new energy to the Prestige offices, as if the building itself was awakening from a long sleep. Mia arrived early, not from obligation but from excitement about possibilities she was still learning to imagine. Daniel had arranged for her to spend the week shadowing Clara and other senior staff members, learning about company operations from perspectives she had never been allowed to see. The experience was revelatory, showing her systems and processes that could be improved, cultural issues that needed addressing, and opportunities for positive change that had been invisible from her previous position. At lunch, she sat with Patterson from accounting, the 62-year-old man who had been targeted as David and Sophia's next victim. He was friendly and competent, with decades of experience that made him invaluable despite his age. "I heard about your meeting yesterday," he said quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "Standing up, fighting back. Some of us have been watching the walls close in but didn't know how to push back without making things worse." Mia realized that her situation had been just one part of a larger pattern of institutional cruelty that had affected multiple employees over months or years. The full scope of the damage was still being uncovered, but early indications suggested that David and Sophia's schemes had created a climate of fear that extended far beyond their direct targets. "Things are going to change," she said. Patterson smiled hopefully. "I'm counting on it." Wednesday brought Clara's resignation letter, submitted directly to Daniel rather than through David's office. After 22 years with the company, she was prepared to start over somewhere else, believing that her role in exposing the discrimination had made her position untenable. Daniel refused to accept her resignation. "You did the right thing," he told her in a private meeting that afternoon. "The company needs people with your integrity, especially now. David will never forgive me for betraying him. David Collins will not be a factor in your future employment decisions." The words carried implications that Clara didn't fully understand but found immensely comforting. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, it felt like justice finally arriving after years of watching good people suffer in silence. Thursday afternoon, Mia made her decision. She called Daniel's office and accepted the position of Director of Employee Relations, effective immediately with a 2-week transition period to wrap up her current responsibilities. That evening, she picked up Emma from after-school care with news that would change both their lives in ways they were just beginning to understand. "Mommy got a new job," she announced over dinner of takeout pizza they could finally afford without guilt. A better job? Much better. With better hours and better pay, and I'll be helping other people who work at the company. Emma grinned, her gap-toothed smile bright with reflected happiness. Like a superhero? Mia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Something like that, sweetheart. Something exactly like that. Do you remember the first time someone believed in your potential when you had stopped believing in yourself? Friday brought the announcement that sent shockwaves through every level of prestige luxury holdings. David Collins and Sophia Collins were taking immediate leave of absence pending the completion of an internal investigation into alleged discriminatory practices. In their absence, the company would be implementing new policies designed to ensure fair treatment of all employees regardless of their personal circumstances. The memo, signed by Daniel King in his newly revealed capacity as chairman of the board, also announced Mia Ramirez's promotion to Director of Employee Relations, effective the following Monday. Reactions varied dramatically across different levels of the organization. Senior executives who had aligned themselves with the Collins faction began updating their resumes and networking with headhunters. Middle management scrambled to distance themselves from discriminatory practices they had previously ignored or enabled. But among the rank-and-file employees, the customer service representatives, administrative assistants, maintenance workers, and support staff who formed the backbone of daily operations, the news was greeted with something approaching celebration. For too long, they had watched talented colleagues disappear through manufactured performance issues, while incompetent but well-connected individuals earned promotions they didn't deserve. The knowledge that their voices might finally matter, that their contributions might actually be recognized and rewarded, created an atmosphere of hope that had been absent for years. In her modest apartment, Sophia Collins stared at the termination letter that had arrived by courier that afternoon. The investigation had moved quickly, uncovering a paper trail of discriminatory actions that made her position legally indefensible. She was being offered a severance package in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and agreeing not to seek employment with any of the company's competitors. David's letter had been even more damning, revealing evidence of financial irregularities that bordered on fraud. His severance package was smaller and came with the implicit understanding that criminal charges were a possibility if he chose to fight the termination. Their carefully constructed world of social status and corporate influence had crumbled in less than a week, destroyed by the very person they had tried to crush under the weight of their manufactured authority. Sophia opened a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, but the expensive liquid tasted like ashes in her mouth. Everything she had worked to build, the social connections, the professional reputation, the sense of superiority that had defined her self-worth, was gone. But perhaps the most bitter realization was that none of it had ever been as solid as she had believed. Their power had been an illusion, dependent on the continued ignorance of someone with real authority. When that authority finally chose to examine their actions, the house of cards collapsed in a matter of days. Monday morning marked the beginning of Mia's new life as Director of Employee Relations. Her office was on the 15th floor, with windows overlooking the city and enough space to hold meetings with employees who needed someone to hear their concerns. Her first official act was to establish an anonymous reporting system that would allow workers to document discrimination or harassment without fear of retaliation. The second was to schedule town hall meetings where employees at all levels could discuss workplace culture and suggest improvements. Clara Martinez was promoted to Senior Administrative Coordinator, reporting directly to Mia rather than to any of the middle managers who had previously controlled her advancement opportunities. At 51, she was finally able to use the leadership skills she had been developing for decades without anyone's permission. Patterson in accounting found his responsibilities expanded to include training new employees and developing improved financial reporting systems. Johnson in marketing was given resources to address his speech challenges and paired with a mentor who helped him build confidence in client presentations. But the real transformation was cultural, a shift in the fundamental assumptions about who mattered and whose contributions deserved recognition. The company began recruiting from a broader pool of candidates, implementing flexible scheduling policies that accommodated family responsibilities, and creating advancement paths that didn't require employees to choose between their personal lives and their professional ambitions. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the lobby of Prestige Luxury Holdings, watching employees arrive for another day of work. The atmosphere was noticeably different, more collaborative, less fearful, filled with the kind of energy that came from people who believed their efforts were valued and their futures were secure. Mia approached from the elevator, carrying a stack of reports that documented the early results of their cultural transformation. Employee satisfaction scores were up 30%, turnover was down significantly, and client feedback showed marked improvement in service quality and responsiveness. The Patterson proposal for automated reporting systems could save us nearly $200,000 annually, she said, handing him the financial projections. And Johnson's client retention strategies? Ahead of projections by 15%. Turns out his speech impediment actually makes him more memorable to clients in a positive way. Daniel smiled, remembering Sophia's dismissive comments about professional presentation standards. What about the discrimination complaints? Down to 0 over the past 6 weeks. People seem to trust that they can resolve issues through proper channels rather than suffering in silence. They walked together toward the elevators, discussing initiatives and improvements with the easy familiarity of colleagues who had found shared purpose in creating positive change. Any regrets? Daniel asked as they reached the 15th floor. Mia considered the question seriously. The past 3 months had been challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated. Longer hours, difficult personnel decisions, and the constant pressure of proving that her promotion had been based on merit rather than sympathy. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just accepted their demotion offer and tried to fly under the radar. Emma would be learning that her mother's dreams didn't matter as much as other people's comfort. And now? Now she's learning that standing up for what's right sometimes costs everything you think you can't afford to lose, but leads to things you never dared to imagine. Have you ever realized that the worst thing that happened to you was actually the doorway to the best thing that could have happened? 6 months later, Prestige Luxury Holdings was featured in a national business magazine as an example of how companies could address workplace discrimination while actually improving their bottom line. The article highlighted Mia's innovative approaches to employee relations and the measurable improvements in productivity and morale that had followed their cultural transformation. Emma, now 8 years old, had started attending a better school in a safer neighborhood, funded by her mother's increased salary and the stability that came with job security. She drew pictures of her mommy's office building and talked proudly about how her mother helped people at work feel better about their jobs. Clara Martinez was featured in the article as an example of how experienced employees could flourish when given opportunities that matched their capabilities rather than their connections. At 52, she was finally working at a level that reflected her decades of accumulated knowledge and skill. Patterson had become the company's informal historian, documenting best practices and training procedures that would prevent future discrimination while ensuring that institutional knowledge was preserved and shared. Johnson's marketing presentations had become legendary within the industry. His unique speaking style transformed from a perceived weakness into a distinctive professional asset. David Collins found employment with a smaller firm at a significantly reduced salary, his reputation within the industry permanently damaged by rumors of the circumstances surrounding his departure from Prestige. He struggled to adapt to environments where his authority was questioned and his decisions required justification. Sophia Collins never returned to corporate employment, instead focusing on social activities that provided the status and recognition she craved without the accountability that came with actual responsibility. But the social circles that had once welcomed her influence now viewed her with suspicion, aware that her downfall had been the result of ethical failures rather than simple bad luck. On a quiet Friday evening, 9 months after that devastating performance review in Conference Room B, Mia stood in her office looking out at the city lights that sparkled like promises in the darkness below. The building was mostly empty, the usual Friday exodus having cleared the floors of all but the most dedicated workaholics. Daniel appeared in her doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. Working late again? Just finishing the quarterly reports. Employee satisfaction is up another 8%, and we've had 17 internal promotions in the past 3 months. All merit-based? All merit-based. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found purpose in creating opportunities for others to succeed. The company that had once been defined by fear and favoritism was becoming something entirely different, a place where talent could flourish regardless of background, where personal circumstances were accommodated rather than penalized, and where everyone's contributions were valued. "You ever think about David and Sophia?" Mia asked. Daniel considered the question. Sometimes. Mostly I feel sorry for them. Sorry? They had real authority, real influence, genuine opportunities to make positive changes. Instead, they chose to use their power to diminish others. In the end, that choice cost them everything they thought they were protecting. Mia thought about the couple who had once held her future in their hands, their careful plans destroyed by the simple act of someone with real power choosing to pay attention to the details they thought they could hide. What if you hadn't bought the company? What if that email hadn't been misdirected to your address? Someone else would have discovered the truth eventually. Discrimination creates patterns, and patterns can be recognized by anyone willing to look carefully enough. But maybe not in time to help me. Daniel smiled. Maybe not. But you would have found another way. People with your integrity and determination don't stay invisible forever. A year later, Mia received a handwritten letter in her office mail, addressed simply to the Director of Employee Relations with no return address. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with a brief message. Thank you for showing me that standing up for what's right isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to suffer the same injustice. My new job is wonderful, and my daughter is proud of her mommy's courage. I hope yours is proud of you too. The letter was unsigned, but Mia recognized the careful handwriting of someone who had learned that their voice mattered, that their story deserved to be heard, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept that unfairness is simply the way things have to be. That evening, she shared the letter with Emma over dinner, explaining how sometimes the hardest experiences in life become the foundation for helping other people avoid the same pain. So, getting fired would have been okay? Emma asked with the directness that only children can manage. No, sweetheart. Losing my job would have been terrible for both of us. But fighting back, standing up for what was right, and finding people who were willing to help, that made everything better not just for us, but for lots of other families too. Like a superhero? Mia laughed, remembering Emma's earlier assessment of her new role. Like someone who learned that the worst thing that can happen to you isn't failing or losing or being hurt by people who should know better. The worst thing is letting those experiences make you smaller instead of stronger. 2 years later, Prestige Luxury Holdings was acquired by a larger corporation, specifically because of its reputation for ethical employment practices and positive workplace culture. Mia was offered a position as Vice President of Human Resources for the entire organization, with responsibility for implementing her successful models across multiple companies and thousands of employees. Daniel sold his stake in the company for nearly 3 times what he had originally invested, but his greatest satisfaction came from knowing that the business would continue operating according to the principles they had established together. The cultural transformation that had begun with one woman's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment had become a sustainable model for corporate responsibility. Clara Martinez was promoted to Director of Operations, finally receiving official recognition for leadership skills that had been overlooked for decades. At 54, she was more energetic and optimistic about her career than she had been at 34, proof that it's never too late for talent to be properly recognized and rewarded. Patterson became Director of Financial Systems, developing innovative approaches to budget management that were adopted by companies throughout the industry. Johnson was promoted to Senior Marketing Manager, his unique presentation style now sought after by clients who valued authenticity over polished perfection. The ripple effects extended far beyond the individuals directly involved, creating a culture where discrimination was not just discouraged but actively prevented through systems and structures that protected vulnerable employees while rewarding merit and contribution. On a spring morning 3 years after that first devastating performance review, Mia stood before a conference room full of executives from companies across the country, sharing the lessons learned from their transformation at Prestige Luxury Holdings. The cost of discrimination isn't just moral, she explained to the assembled group. It's financial, operational, and strategic. When you systematically exclude or undervalue employees based on their personal circumstances, you lose access to their full potential. You create fear that stifles innovation, resentment that undermines teamwork, and turnover that wastes training investments. But more than that, she continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through both sides of the equation. Discrimination destroys the fundamental trust between employers and employees that makes real productivity possible. When people believe their jobs depend on hiding who they are rather than demonstrating what they can do, everyone loses. The presentation lasted 2 hours, followed by another hour of questions from executives who were grappling with similar challenges in their own organizations. Several asked for consulting engagements, wanting to implement similar systems and cultural changes. But the question that stayed with Mia came from a young woman in the back row, someone who looked like she might be dealing with her own version of the challenges Mia had faced years earlier. What advice would you give to someone who's experiencing discrimination right now, but doesn't have anyone with power willing to help? Mia was quiet for a moment, remembering the fear and desperation that had once made every day feel like a battle for survival. Document everything. Find allies wherever you can, even if they don't seem powerful. Trust that your integrity will be recognized eventually, but don't be afraid to seek help from unexpected sources. And remember that standing up for yourself isn't just about you. It's about creating a better environment for everyone who comes after you. After the conference, Mia returned to her home office to find Emma, now 11, working on a school project about careers and social justice. The report was titled, "Why My Mom's Job Matters," and it detailed the transformation at Prestige Luxury Holdings as an example of how individual actions can create systematic change. "Did I get the story right?" Emma asked, showing her the draft. Mia read through her daughter's carefully researched account, amazed at how clearly Emma had understood the broader implications of their family's experience. "You got it exactly right, sweetheart. But you know the story isn't finished yet, don't you?" "What do you mean?" "Every day there are people facing the same kinds of challenges we faced. And every day, there are opportunities to help them the way Daniel and Clara and others helped us. The story continues every time someone chooses to stand up for what's right instead of what's easy." Emma smiled with the confidence of a child who had learned that fairness was something worth fighting for. "So we keep being superheroes? We keep being human beings who remember what it felt like to need help, and who choose to provide that help whenever we can." That evening, as Mia tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked one more question. "Mom, what if David and Sophia had been nice to you instead of mean? What if they had helped you instead of trying to fire you?" Mia considered the question seriously. "Then maybe they would still have their jobs and their respect and their happiness. And maybe I would still be working in my old position, doing good work, but never getting the chance to help as many people as I can help now. So sometimes bad things that happen to you lead to good things happening to other people? Sometimes. But that doesn't make the bad things okay. It just means that we can choose to let our pain become a source of strength for others instead of just a source of bitterness for ourselves." 5 years later, Mia published a book about workplace discrimination and cultural transformation that became required reading in business schools across the country. The dedication read, "To Emma, who taught me that being a superhero isn't about having special powers. It's about using whatever power you have to protect people who need protection." The book's final chapter addressed a question she was frequently asked during speaking engagements, whether she had ever regretted fighting back instead of simply accepting the demotion that David and Sophia had offered. "The easy path would have been to accept their terms, to shrink my dreams to fit their limitations, to teach my daughter that some people matter more than others and that fairness is a luxury we couldn't afford," she wrote. "But taking the easy path would have cost me something more valuable than financial security or career advancement. It would have cost me the knowledge that I had done everything possible to protect not just my own future, but the futures of other employees who deserved better treatment than they were receiving. The hardest battles aren't always the ones we choose to fight. Sometimes they choose us. But we always get to choose how we fight them, and whether we fight them alone or find ways to build alliances that make victory possible. Most importantly, we get to choose what we do with the victories when they come. Do we use our good fortune to lift others up, or do we simply enjoy our improved circumstances while forgetting how it felt to need help? Today, Emma is 16 years old, applying to colleges where she wants to study social justice and business ethics. Her essay describes growing up with a mother who taught her that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept that unfairness is simply the way things have to be. Clara Martinez, now 58, serves as a mentor for other administrative professionals who want to advance their careers, but don't know how to navigate corporate politics without compromising their integrity. She frequently speaks at conferences about the importance of supporting colleagues who face discrimination, even when that support comes at personal cost. Daniel King expanded his investment portfolio to include companies that demonstrated exceptional workplace culture and ethical business practices. His net worth increased substantially, but he measures success by the number of employees whose lives improved because he chose to pay attention to details that other investors ignored. Patterson retired at 67 with full benefits, and the knowledge that his contributions to the company were recognized and valued. Johnson was promoted to vice president of marketing, his unique presentation style having become a signature element of the company's brand identity. David Collins works for a small consulting firm where his authority is limited, and his decisions require approval from partners who don't tolerate discriminatory behavior. The experience has been humbling, but it has also provided opportunities for reflection and personal growth that his previous position never offered. Sophia Collins eventually found employment with a nonprofit organization focused on workplace equity, a choice that surprised everyone who knew her. The work pays less than her previous position, but it has provided her with insights into the human cost of the discriminatory practices she once supported. And in conference rooms across the country, executives examine their own employment practices with new awareness of how discrimination costs companies not just legal liability, but innovation, productivity, and the trust that makes organizations truly successful. The story that began with one woman's desperate attempt to keep her job became a transformation that affected thousands of employees and dozens of companies. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about choosing to believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. Have you ever lived through or known someone who went through something similar? Have you watched someone face discrimination because of their family situation, their background, or circumstances beyond their control? Have you seen how a single person's courage can change an entire organization's culture? Perhaps you've been the person who needed help, or perhaps you've been the person with power who could choose whether to help or look away. Maybe you've seen how quickly unfairness can be corrected when someone with authority decides to pay attention to what's really happening. The most powerful lesson from Mia's story isn't about corporate transformation or even about fighting discrimination. It's about recognizing that every day we make choices about whether to use whatever power we have to protect people who need protection, or to use that power to protect only ourselves. Sometimes the difference between justice and injustice is simply someone choosing to look carefully at what's happening, rather than accepting convenient explanations. Sometimes the difference between hope and despair is someone choosing to believe that ordinary people deserve extraordinary respect. The transformation at Prestige wasn't achieved overnight, nor was it accomplished without setbacks and challenges. In the months following David and Sophia's departure, there were moments when the old culture threatened to reassert itself. Middle managers who had benefited from the previous system pushed back against new policies. Some clients questioned whether the company's newfound focus on employee welfare might compromise service quality. Board members occasionally wondered if Daniel's approach was too idealistic for the competitive business environment. But each challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate that ethical business practices and financial success weren't mutually exclusive. When a major client complained about working with Johnson because of his speech patterns, Mia arranged for the client to speak directly with other customers who had specifically requested his services, praising his thorough preparation and genuine enthusiasm for their projects. The complaining client not only withdrew their objection, but asked to be transferred to Johnson's team permanently. When Patterson's age became a concern during a company acquisition review, Mia compiled data showing how his institutional knowledge and mentoring of younger staff had prevented costly mistakes and accelerated training processes. The acquiring company ended up offering Patterson a consulting contract that extended his career by 5 years, while providing them with invaluable expertise. These small victories accumulated over time, creating a foundation of trust and respect that made larger transformations possible. Employees began suggesting improvements to company policies, knowing their input would be valued. Managers started recognizing and addressing problematic behaviors before they escalated into formal complaints. The company's reputation for fair treatment began attracting higher-quality job candidates, while employee referrals increased dramatically as workers became genuine ambassadors for their workplace. But perhaps the most significant change was in the stories people told about their work. Instead of counting down hours until they could leave, employees spoke about projects they were excited to complete. Rather than complaining about their supervisors, they shared examples of support and recognition they had received. The energy in the office transformed from resigned endurance to engaged enthusiasm. This transformation didn't go unnoticed by competitors and industry observers. Business schools began sending students to study prestigious employee relations model. Consulting firms started offering services based on principles that Mia had developed through trial and error. Other companies poached employees not just for their skills, but for their experience working in an ethical organizational culture. The success created new challenges. Media attention brought scrutiny of every policy and practice, with reporters and researchers looking for evidence that the transformation was merely cosmetic. Employee expectations rose as they saw what was possible when leadership prioritized their welfare. Competitors attempted to undermine Prestige's reputation by spreading rumors about unsustainable practices and inevitable failure. Mia found herself becoming a public figure, invited to speak at conferences and testify before legislative committees examining workplace discrimination. The attention was uncomfortable but necessary, providing platforms to share lessons learned and advocate for policy changes that would protect vulnerable workers across industries. She developed frameworks for identifying discrimination that could be hidden by seemingly neutral policies. She created training programs that helped managers recognize unconscious bias in hiring and promotion decisions. Most importantly, she demonstrated that addressing discrimination wasn't about lowering standards or making exceptions, but about ensuring that standards were applied fairly and consistently. These innovations had ripple effects far beyond Prestige. Other companies adopted similar policies, creating networks of employers committed to ethical practices. Industry associations developed best practices guidelines based on Prestige's model. Legislators referenced their success when crafting anti-discrimination legislation. But the real measure of success remained personal and individual. It showed up in the thank you notes from employees who had been promoted based on merit rather than connections. It appeared in the retention statistics showing that talented workers no longer felt compelled to leave in search of fair treatment elsewhere. It was reflected in the children's drawings that decorated office walls, showing parents who loved their jobs and felt proud of their workplace. Emma grew up watching these changes unfold, understanding from an early age that work could be a source of fulfillment rather than just financial necessity. She saw her mother's colleagues become extended family, supporting each other through personal challenges while collaborating on professional goals. She learned that leadership meant serving others, not commanding them. These lessons shaped Emma's own aspirations and values. Her college application essays described internships at nonprofit organizations, volunteer work with refugee resettlement programs, and research projects examining systemic barriers to educational opportunity. She had inherited her mother's commitment to justice, but expressed it through her own unique talents and interests. The scholarship she received was funded by a foundation that Daniel had established to support children of employees who had overcome workplace discrimination. The foundation provided not just financial assistance, but mentoring programs that connected young people with professionals who could help them navigate career challenges. Emma wasn't the only beneficiary. Clara's daughter received support for graduate school in social work, while Patterson's grandson got assistance for medical school. Johnson's children participated in speech therapy programs that helped them develop confidence in public speaking. The foundation became another way that the transformation at Prestige continued to create positive change long after the original crisis had been resolved. As Emma prepared for college, she asked her mother a question that had been growing in importance as she learned more about the world beyond their transformed workplace. What happens to people who face discrimination in companies that don't have someone like Daniel willing to help? It was a question that kept Mia awake at night, knowing that for every success story like hers, there were countless others who continued to suffer in silence or fight battles they couldn't win. The consulting work she did with other organizations revealed consistent patterns of discrimination that persisted despite anti-discrimination laws and corporate diversity statements. Many companies treated diversity and inclusion as public relations exercises rather than fundamental business practices. They hired consultants to conduct training sessions that employees forgot within weeks. They established diversity committees that met irregularly and had no real authority to implement changes. They published statistics showing demographic progress while ignoring complaints about workplace culture that made that progress superficial and unsustainable. The problem wasn't just ignorance or ill will, though both certainly existed. Often, it was a failure of imagination, an inability to envision different ways of operating that might be more effective as well as more fair. Many managers had succeeded within existing systems and couldn't conceive that those systems might be fundamentally flawed rather than simply requiring minor adjustments. This realization led Mia to develop new approaches that focused on systemic change rather than individual awareness. Instead of trying to change people's attitudes, she worked on changing structures and processes that produce discriminatory outcomes, regardless of individual intentions. She created decision-making frameworks that included multiple perspectives by design, rather than relying on decision-makers to remember to seek input from diverse sources. She developed metrics that measured inclusion rather than just representation, tracking whether employees from different backgrounds had equal access to advancement opportunities, mentoring relationships, and challenging assignments. She established feedback systems that made it safe for employees to report problems without fear of retaliation, and accountability systems that ensured those reports led to meaningful responses. Most importantly, she insisted that senior leadership be held accountable for inclusion outcomes in the same way they were accountable for financial performance. When executive bonuses depended partially on employee satisfaction scores broken down by demographic groups, discriminatory practices began disappearing much more quickly than when inclusion was treated as a nice-to-have benefit rather than a business imperative. These innovations spread through her consulting network and conference presentations, creating waves of change that extended far beyond any single organization. But Mia remained aware that systemic change required more than individual company transformations. It required shifts in how society understood work, relationships, and human dignity. She began writing op-ed pieces for national newspapers, arguing that workplace discrimination wasn't just a burden for victims, but a drag on economic productivity and social cohesion. She testified before congressional committees about the costs of discrimination to businesses and the economy as a whole. She participated in documentary projects that brought human faces to abstract policy discussions. The book she eventually published synthesized years of experience helping organizations transform their cultures while supporting individuals who face discrimination. It became a bestseller not because it offered simple solutions, but because it honestly addressed the complexity of creating lasting change in environments that had been shaped by decades or centuries of unfair practices. The book's success led to speaking engagements around the world, as countries grappled with workplace discrimination that took different forms but followed similar patterns. In some places, the discrimination was based on gender, religion, or ethnicity. In others, it focused on age, disability, or social class. But everywhere, the basic dynamic remained the same. People with power making decisions that systematically disadvantaged people without power, often while telling themselves they were simply maintaining necessary standards. Her international work revealed how discrimination functioned as a global phenomenon, with multinational corporations exporting discriminatory practices from their home countries or adapting local prejudices to serve their business interests. But it also showed how positive changes could spread across borders, as companies that succeeded with inclusive practices became models for others to follow. The ripple effects continued expanding in directions that Mia couldn't have anticipated when she was sitting in that conference room facing David and Sophia's manufactured performance review. Business schools restructured their curricula to emphasize ethical leadership alongside financial management. Professional associations developed certification programs for managers committed to inclusive practices. Investment funds began incorporating workplace culture assessments into their due diligence processes. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural, a growing recognition that workplace discrimination wasn't just illegal or immoral, but counterproductive and unsustainable. Companies that continued discriminatory practices found themselves increasingly isolated, struggling to attract talented employees and ethical business partners. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. Discrimination persisted in many forms and places, often adapting to evade detection while maintaining its essential character. But the conversation had shifted and the expectations had changed. What had once been accepted as normal business practice was now recognized as a problem that demanded solutions. Emma's generation grew up with different assumptions about what was possible and acceptable in workplace relationships. They expected employers to accommodate family responsibilities, celebrate diverse perspectives, and create advancement opportunities based on merit rather than connections. They were willing to change jobs, start companies, or even change careers to find environments that matched their values. This generational shift created additional pressure for organizational change. as companies discovered they couldn't attract or retain young talent without demonstrating genuine commitment to inclusive practices. The transformation that had begun with one woman's refusal to accept unfair treatment had become a movement that shaped labor markets and business culture across industries. But Mia never forgot that behind every statistic and policy change were individual human beings whose lives were affected by the choices that organizations made about how to treat their employees. The letters that continued arriving in her office reminded her that the work was far from finished, and that each person who found the courage to speak up against unfairness was fighting not just for themselves, but for everyone who would come after them. As Emma prepared to graduate from college and enter the workforce herself, Mia reflected on how much had changed since that desperate morning when she had pressed the elevator button and headed toward what she thought might be the end of her career. The scared woman who had whispered, "I need this job," had become someone whose voice carried influence in boardrooms and legislative chambers around the world. But the most important transformation hadn't been professional or public. It had been personal. The recognition that her own worth wasn't determined by other people's treatment of her, and that standing up for herself had been an act of service to everyone who needed the same courage she had somehow found when it mattered most. The story continued every day in workplaces around the world, wherever someone chose fairness over favoritism, inclusion over exclusion, and hope over cynicism. It lived on in the policies that protected vulnerable employees, the cultures that celebrated diverse contributions, and the individual acts of courage that transformed fear into possibility. And in the end, that was the real lesson. Not that one person could change everything, but that everyone had the power to change something, and that those small changes could accumulate into transformations that nobody could have imagined when they began. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of challenges you've faced or victories you've won, if it made you think about how you could use your own influence to create positive changes in your workplace or community, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Your support allows us to keep sharing stories about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Because in the end, we're all just people trying to build better lives for ourselves and our families. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to let other people's limitations define our possibilities.